The cheese. That's the talk of the town, the highest ownership guy in fantasy. I don't think you can bet against him, really, with a full-time gig at the Roosters and no uncertainty of his position. I think he's a safe guy to own and one of the only guys you can classify as a must-have this year.
There's been a lot of talk about him, right? As a lot of people are going, oh, do I anti-pod him? I don't think he's going to go very well. But we're looking at scores of him playing in the 13 role and limited minutes. He played 50 minutes, and the fact that he'd already signed with the Roosters. He moves to the Roosters squad, which, you look at Jake Friend, for example, and he was a bit of a no fuss type of 9, obviously really, really good. But he was able to average like a low 50s in this team. You've seen Verrills be able to average a mid 40s, and he's nothing, he's a good player, but nothing special in terms of attacking stats. So to go against Brandon Smith, who's a dual position hooker and mid, would seem very silly in my eyes. 585k. If it was about 680 or something like that, then you could look, oh, maybe we can avoid him. But at this point, he's just going to at least at a minimum score 45 and be 4 points undervalued, but has upside of close to 60 with what we saw at Storm, right?
Yeah, well, Connor Watson out as well probably helps him more than hurts him because you probably have guys like Hutchinson or Turpin coming in instead, and he probably plays a couple of extra middle minutes as well. So I think I probably expect him to average low 50s or maybe even up to 55.
Wow, yes, that's a must-have, isn't it? And I think he's not one to avoid. I think someone like Hammer, I'm personally potentially going to go against the grain and not pick up him. But Brandon Smith, a middle forward, middle forward hooker there, that I just don't think you can fade him at all. Thoughts on the Roosters? I have them number 1 on the ladder this year. If everything goes to plan, obviously injuries-wise, but that's the same with every team. I think they've got the best team on paper. They obviously lose Taukei'aho, which is a big loss, obviously, in that middle. But they have guys like Egan Butcher that can come in and fill that role and really grow into it. What are your thoughts on the Roosters overall?
Yeah, I have the Roosters personally number 1 as well. They don't have all those injuries that they had last year. And I think Sam Walker now in the halfback role full-time, growing another year, it's just going to be wheels up for the Roosters. I think even though Robbo usually has them starting slow, he always has them peaking for the finals in the back end of the year. I think they'll definitely be top 4 and top 2, if not the minor premiers.
I actually think I have them starting a little bit better this year. I just think with injury-wise, they've been a little bit more settled. You've got Brandon Smith coming over, full preseason for him, which has been great. And the rest of the guys very, very well injury-free. And you've got Sam Walker, another full preseason now. Since moving to the 7-role, guys, he played a lot better. And the team played a lot better with him at the helm and Kiri moving to more of that running role. So I can see them starting a bit better. You saw the first game last year, they had the Knights and they got beat, right? The Knights looked like world beaters, and that obviously turned out not to be. And the Roosters were terrible. So Teddy had a bad start. All of these guys started really poorly. I can see them improving at the beginning of this year. So let's talk about Sam Walker there. What are your overall thoughts on him?
Yeah, I'm a little upset that they priced him up 2 points because it turned him from a nice, safe pod play to one that you really want to be a keeper now. And with Cheese being pretty much a must-have, it's really difficult to own more than a couple Roosters with their round 4 bye. Otherwise, you'll really be hurting for points. I really like Walker. I think, he averaged 49 the back end of last year in the halfback role. So there's 5 points of value. And if he improves and the Roosters are better, that moves into the 50s. It's just, is he 10 points of value or do you see him as a low-level keeper?
Yeah, and with the buy in round 4, you want him to be hitting sort of 54, 55 early, right, to get a good bit of value. And then you have him on the pine for round 4, and then he can really launch from there. But if you look at their first 3 games, that's probably the most interesting part, is the fact they've got Dolphins and the Warriors to kick things off. So attacking players like Tedesco, like Walker, like Brandon Smith, for example, there. And then there's edge back rowers in Butcher, Crichton. There's plenty of value out there for these guys to have really big starts. What do you see? Do you see that as being a good enough reason to start with a bunch of these guys with their Dolphins and Warriors? Obviously, Rabbitohs being a bit harder, but those first 2 rounds, to get off to a good start, make yourself feel good as a coach, to be like, yes, I've started really well. Do you see them coming out and doing well, or do they come out and do what they did against the Knights?
I think they're more of a chance to do well this year, especially with those 2 games to start. I think it's a little easier to pick up the really expensive outside backs because they usually drop a bit to begin the year when teams have rust. There's not as much attack going on and they're still working into their maximum work rate. But with Dolphins and Warriors, Teddy could put a 70 and an 80 on there and just come out of the blocks monstrous. So I think there's really good opportunity for the Roosters to start fast, and guys like Tedesco, Crichton and Butcher who don't mind a try, they could have really big starts, as you were saying.
Yeah, but the main issue after that, obviously, is Rabbitohs round 3, by round 4, Eels, Storm, Sharks. So that becomes a little bit tough. Probably cancels itself out, right? You're going to feel really great in the first 2 rounds, and you get a Bunnies tough game, but very much a rivalry game. And then into a bye, and you're like, oh, I was feeling good, but now I'm not so much. So how many of these Roosters can you take? Because there are even other guys that have a bit of value in, what's our middle forwards now? I can't even see him in there. Lindsay Collins, for example, there I see is having a little bit of value, but obviously a bit of a concussion risk and injury risk as well. Let's go to him to kick it off with. Do we see much value for him?
Yeah, Lindsay Collins is a tricky one to read, actually, because 2020, he did okay. 2021, his PPM was really good and he had decent minutes, and he actually averaged around that 50 mark. Last year, his work rate wasn't great, to be honest, but with a couple of those props leaving the Roosters, I think he has to step up now. I think that he'll probably at least be 5, 6, 7 points of value, if not a little bit more. But yeah, it's hard to predict him as a safe cow, but he's definitely an interesting pod option.
Yeah, now we'll do another comparison. If you've got him and Daniel Saifiti, who's a tiny bit more expensive, right? Saifiti has a little bit less risk in terms of concussion. It sounds like he doesn't have a buy-in round 4. You probably just pick Daniel Saifiti, right?
Yeah, that's probably a pretty good comparison. At least Saifiti has some past history of doing well.
Yeah.
Last year, he had a really injury-affected season and had a low work rate, whereas the couple of years before was close to 1, a 0.9, a 0.1, or 1 ppm. I think he's a lot safer to do 10 points than Lindsay Collins is. And he's only about 10K different, isn't he? So, yeah.
Yeah, so Collins definitely, look, if he comes out and averages 48.50, you wouldn't be surprised, but it's still a bit of a risk, that's for sure. Let's go with the Butchers to kick things off. Egan comes in at 561. His PPM is absolutely incredible when he gets a great chance in the middle, even on the edge there when he ever gets that chance. But he's obviously very expensive. I don't see him as being an option at the start. Do you agree?
Yeah, I heard some talk that he might even start on the edge ahead of Nat, but surely they can't do that. Nat did so well at the back end of last year. I think he just gets a couple more minutes with guys like, I don't know what's happening with Lodge. Hey, they're probably still looking at that CBA and re-signing him and upgrade him from that trainer trial. But yeah, Egan probably is a decent scorer, but probably scores the same as last year in a decent work rate.
Well, he needs to, if he can take over Takeaho's role, who was a big minute guy. Like, you've got Hargraves who's going to lower and lower minutes over the next couple of years. There's every chance that Butcher could end up being that big middle guy, along with, just really the only issue is having Collins there who can play big minutes as well. But if they pick Butcher for the big minutes, 55, 60, then he could be a 50 scorer, right?
Yeah, well, I just filtered his minutes from last year. And over 40 minutes, he averaged 51 from 49 minutes. So that's over a point a minute. Yeah. If Collins, with his concussion history, goes down for any period, Butcher could take over that spot, get dual, and then be up and away. So he's one to definitely chuck a star on.
Because who are their big middle forwards? You got Radley, obviously, at 13, but he's in and out of the team as well, right?
You got Collins, you got Maria Hargreaves, and both of those have got concussion risks. So you possibly got Lodge, but we don't know what's going on with there yet. I'd expect him to sign before the season starts into a top 30 position. But yeah, it's really one of them needs to go, and then Butcher can be a star. At the moment, he'll just sit at that 35 minutes, scoring at a little bit better than that.
I've just got, in my head, I've got a potential for Butcher to play that 55, 60 minutes, and I think that could be crazy, and it could be a very sneaky one that no one's talking about, just with the makeup of their forwards, because Takeaho was their big minute guy. So keep an eye out on him, guys, if there's any talk about him, and if he's starting, for example, that's probably going to be a big show, like if it's him and Collins or him and Hargraves. Hargraves spent some time on the bench last year, right?
Yeah, I think he was eased back from a couple of injuries and head knocks. Well, they just Boyd Corner's just retired, and they've still got two guys who are head knock prone. So
Yeah.
if Butcher can be there as a more consistent guy, maybe they will give him a bigger role.
Yeah, I can see that for sure, and it could be an interesting one that no one's talking about. That I'm going to go out there and say he could end up averaging close to 50 at some point this year because his brother does it, and I think Egan has a better PPM, better work rate than Nat does. So, anyway, let's go to Nat now. At 48.3, being priced up, which is the painful thing. At 45.5, I think he's pretty well a shoo-in to make plenty of cash. There are a lot of games last year where he did score a lot of tries, but that shows the quality that the Roosters have and him as a runner as well. So don't discount that as, oh, he did score a lot of tries for the sake of it. He could definitely do it again, right? Angus Crichton's been a guy that scores a lot of tries year on, year out.
Yeah, there's edge back rowers will score tries from time to time. I mean, you look at Fafita, you look at Angus Crichton, and if you've got a good team that will give them good ball and put them into holes, they're going to score well. So I think Nat Butcher's tries aren't necessarily a problem. I don't think he'll improve his try scoring rate too much, but like you don't need him to. You just need him to be consistent in that 80-minute edge roll. I think when he was doing that big minute roll last year, he averaged about 53, 54 or something. So that's a keeper level scores. The only question mark is, does Sitili Tupanua take that spot back? Even though he's coming back, I don't even think long term he does take it back, to be honest. I think Butcher's probably got it.
Yeah, he's definitely good enough, right? He's had a great career, Tupanua. But that's the big thing there. You've got the dual position for Nat, which is another big tick. So if you can get 5.6 points out of him and you got the dual position, just the buy in round 4 is a bit of an issue. So you get one less good score out of him than you would if Tupanua comes back and takes some type of minutes. You'd imagine he at least comes back off the bench and takes 20 or 30 off Nat. And we saw what happened last year. There was random games we thought he was going to get big minutes and then he would just play 30 and that was the end of him. So there's definitely some risk around it. And looking back, and I had him as a really big buy at the start of the year for the dual position, for the safety in that 50 odd points role. But there's other guys at that price that I think that, or less, that could average close to that 50 mark and probably have a few less risky points to do with them. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, Angus Crichton's a big topic here. He obviously goes up 3 points on his price point, which we don't like, right? But can you see him averaging 60 again like he has in the past?
I think he can average 60. I don't know if he will, but he'll be very close. I did the breakdown of him pretty recently for the pod list.
Yes,
I think the ideal situation is he stays with Keary on his edge. Last year, he had a couple of games off the bench and then a couple of games on the other side. But when he moved back to his favorite edge, and then especially when Keary was giving him ball, he was just getting through holes and going through for a lot of tries and getting some really good scores. I think he's probably one to do that again. We've seen him score 60-plus seasons in the past. This could be a return.
He had a weird start, didn't he? Got dropped at one point. Didn't score very well at the start. Then you pick him up and did a few okay scores through the middle and then obviously went great in the back end. So to have a really, really weird year like that and still average 53... there's definitely some upside, but that 3-point ad that he has there, he's just under 800k, is a little bit scary with the round 4 buy. So there's 3 things right there that we're a little bit worried about, to be honest, in this scenario. We'll leave Hutchison because he needs injuries for him to play any decent role. We've got Keary at 567 for those of the casual fans that are out there that are just getting into fantasy. What are our thoughts on Keary, Scoop?
Yeah, Keary's a good player, but with the switch to 5'8" instead of halfback, Walker then took over more of the kicking and a little bit more of the playmaking. I think Keary averaged about 33 at 5'8" compared to mid-40s at halfback. So with that set to continue this year, he's going to lose cash instead of make it.
Good. Is there any reason to start with Joey Manu with the dual position at the best average in the centres by far?
I don't think so. Look, there's a world in which he almost keeps that price up with potentially him roaming. But I mean, he has to improve from his already awesome 45 average to 50 in order to keep that price there. You just wait for him to drop and pick him up in Origin. That's how it goes every year, doesn't it? He plays fullback or 5'8" and scores 70, and then he goes back to centre gun anyway.
That's probably the only thing I've got right in the last few years, apart from helping you guys. But with my own team, picking up Joey Manu at the correct time each of the last 2 years I think 2 years ago it was a little bit earlier. Last year was a bit more through the middle, but you get those cracking scores. And we look here, right? Their only issue is that they have a bye in round 13. So you're probably looking to pick him up either in round 5 or 6. He's going to score pretty well against most teams. Or round 14, you get him for that middle section, round 14 all the way to 18. You do miss him in those two big buys there, around 13 and 19. So if not, you're not getting him in round 14. You're picking him up in round 20, and he's going to be a gun for the back end for sure. And potentially injuries, which we hope that doesn't happen. But yeah, Joey Manu, yes, it's a tough position center, right? But do you just think that because it'd be nice to lock in a gun, right? But his big chance is to average that 45 to 47, right? And lose a bit of value is why you wouldn't pick him up and would go for another gun if you're looking to go for a gun?
Yeah, if you're going to go for a gun, save 100K and go Valentine Holmes with that Cowboys early draw and goal kicking.
Yeah, good idea. Momorowski, probably a little bit too expensive at this point. Need him a little bit cheaper for sure. Jackson Polo there, he looks like he's getting the right wing spot, right? If everything goes as planned, Suaalii goes to the left center. We have Paulo there on the right at 395 with dual position. Is he of some interest?
He's a little bit of interest, but I'd like him to be cheaper. He feels like an Isaac Thompson type of guy who's on the wing in a team at a above base price, but at nearly 400. We saw what he did at the Rabbitohs. It was okay, but not great. He dropped a lot of balls. Maybe at the Roosters he can be more consistent. The duel's interesting, but I think he's probably only half the value you'd want to be picking him up at.
Yeah, and then buying round 4, it's hard to get that early season cash out of him. He's probably that slow kind of burner in terms of cash wise, and you can get about a 32 out of him, which again is not enough with the buy in round 4. And in a tough centre position where we're not sure where Isaac Thompson's going to end up. We're most likely going to have him in our squad, but does he stay in there? That's my main issue here. We'll speak about Suaalii right now as well. So if you're picking him up, he's going to be in the centre position, dual position. He's improving. He's obviously a superstar. But if you're going Isaac Thompson and Suaalii there, that's potentially two guys that aren't going to be there in round 4. Do you see that as a big issue?
Yeah, it's tough to know because Isaac Thompson has that job security uncertainty with Milne suspended for the first week. And, well, Suaalii has the bye. So I think that, Suaalii is almost certainly going to be centre. He's just been named there in trials, which is really great. Okay. We've got a bit of certainty about that finally. But yeah, Isaac Thompson is tough to know. And if you're going to have both of them, it's going to be really, really hair-scratching and nail-biting for that first couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, I suppose if it does go against the plan, if Thompson is out of the team, you have Suaalii in your side. Yes, if he's scoring well, you've got him here just based on his wing pricing and playing on the wing is what you've got there, is already scoring a lot of tries. Hard to see much value. Do you see much improvement from him in the centres in general? I
don't know. I think he's a narrative buy rather than a stats buy because centre is one of the worst scoring positions, but he is so tall, very talented, another year older and is muscling up, not a 17-year-old averaging pretty poorly in centres in reserve grade. He's now a couple of years older in a crazy good Roosters team. I think that with him and Daniel Tupou being the skyscrapers on the left, they're going to see a lot of ball and a lot of kicks to jump and win tries, honestly. So he could be a really sneaky shout to be a centre keeper this year.
Yeah, I definitely have the interest in him. That what I was getting at before was that if you have both of those guys out in round 4, you're most likely going to have to trade to bring in a centre. And then you could have, if just say you go Tommy Talau and you'd have him only for round 4, you'd have to trade someone out to bring in another centre. And do you want 4 centres in your team? Do you trade out Isaac Thompson, who eventually gets his spot back? If there's an injury, for example, he'd go straight into that. So that's kind of what I'm going through in my head as to if I'm picking him up. And I'm not sure if it's worth it, to be honest, to be able to have to merry-go-round your centres like that.
Yeah, it's tough. I think Dimitri likes Thompson, and there was noise that he might have been playing finals last year, but it's just too much. It's too much.
And it could work out great. Like if you have Tommy Talau and he starts to play pretty well by round 2 or 3 or 4, you could play him and Isaac Thompson, and then you've got Suaalii who's making you money, and then he has a real clean run after that. So it could work out great, but I do think that's a risk there. Let's quickly talk about Radley. Again, for the casual fan, he's a great player. He just seems to get suspended too much. He gets sin binned a lot. He had a game where he got sin binned 2 or 3 times? Was it 3 or...?
I can't remember. I think there was one where he got 2. Yeah. But yeah, he's one of those guys, a little bit like Toby Rudolph, who's like, wow, he's a good player, but he's not a good fantasy player. He's that smashes through the line. People hate to tackle him, but he just doesn't get the stats that you need for fantasy points.
Yeah, good call. Good call in there as a trap. Billy Smith, he's someone that does score well once he gets 3 games in, but unfortunately he just gets injured all the time. He's so injury prone. I just don't think you can plug him in your team, even at 319 if he gets back in, right?
Yeah, well, I really feel for poor Billy Smith because I think he had, 3 ACL injuries in a row.
Yeah.
And, now that Suaalii is moving to left centre, Joe Manu's at the right centre, how does he get in? Yeah, he's going to have to be a wing spot.
Or wing, yeah, for sure. And yeah, we just need to see him get an extended run before we pick him up in our side, because he can score. He'll go like 15, 20, and then he'll go 50, and then he'll get injured. And it's like, he just starts to get a bit of a run, and then he goes. Poor fella. We spoke about Smith. We spoke about Suaalii. We've got Tedesco here. Obviously a clear-cut gun each and every year. 54 last year was probably was definitely one of his lower years. Do we see him going back to... I've got him priced at about a 57 at the moment. Do you have him somewhere there as well?
I think that with those soft 2 games to begin the year, he starts with a bang instead of starting a little bit slow like he sometimes does, and he can push upwards. There's a little bit of reason to start with him instead of Latrell, because Latrell has that such tough draw. He showed he is almost fixture-proof last year, but the Bunnies are beating everybody. So I think Tedesco is a little bit safer at the exactly same price.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So he's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 wing fullbacks, guys. So really at some point you need to get him in. If we're looking at him, you either start with him. Round 5, you could go for it, really. But it might most likely, if you can't get him in those sections there, I think you're just avoiding him through the middle, because they have the buys. Thankfully, good for him in round 13 and 19 when he would be out anyway, but 16 he's out as well. So you'd only get him for maybe round 14, 15 and 17, 18, but limited minutes. So really it's either at the start, I think, round 5. So round 1, round 5, and then round 20 or 21 to round out the year. So very interesting. And do you even hold him for the whole year if you pick him up in round 1? That's the other question, Lockie.
Yeah, that's a tough one, hey, because the Roosters have one of I think it's the equal best draw for Origin stars.
Yeah.
They have round 13 and round 19 off, so they don't miss an extra week there. They only definitely miss round 16. Then the Bulldogs and the Raiders games are 4-day backups, so they'll probably play there. The only other one that he's a good chance to miss is the Storm one in round 20, where they back up 3 days later, but it's a Storm game. That's a big game that they'll try to win, so he might be back. Honestly, he is a better one to hold all year compared to somebody like, I think the worst is the Tigers. So if Coruscant plays Origin, he's going to miss 4 extra games, no questions asked. Teddy might only miss 1 or 2, and that's not as good as like a non-Origin gun, but it's still pretty good.
But yeah, there's so many of the guns in fantasy are Origin players, right? So it makes it hard that way. And guys, just what he said there with that 4-day backup. So he's got that in brackets after the buys there. You see Bulldogs with the 4 in brackets, Raiders the 4, and then Storm with the 3. So it's going to be really helpful if you're going to pick some of these guns. And we look at it, guys, there's so many buys this year, right? Each team has at least 3 buys. And some are going to miss 4 games, some are going to miss 5. So every player's got some type of predicament in that. There are going to be guys that you have to hold throughout the season, even if they have 3 or 4 buys, right? If they're not playing. So keep that in mind, that most people are going to look pretty crap in terms of that middle part of the year. So really, you're just going to have to hold a bunch of them and pick the worst. Pick the best, right? The guys that aren't going to have a ridiculous amount of games in a row where they're missing. You see here, Teddy's got one early on, which is going to be fine. You should be able to cover him. Obviously going to miss out on 15 or 20 points most likely in that round. But over the Origin period, there are teams with buys in round 13, round 17, and round 21, for example. They miss 16, they miss 19 for Origin as well. There's so many games in there they're going to miss. So keep that in mind when you're looking to pick up players. And Scoop and I got a deep dive into the different draws that a lot of these teams have just after we've done all these team analysis, guys. So hang out for that probably a week or so before the season. I'm excited for that. Lockie's put in plenty of work on that one. So thank you for that. But we'll jump into that shortly. Daniel Tupou there is next at a 509k price point. Obviously, could be a little bit more of a beneficiary if the Roosters are dominating. They have a really strong left side, right? If Kiri's going to be there with Crichton, with Suali'i, you've got Tupou on the end of that. So many weapons there. They can use him and Suali'i in the air. You know, Tupou back as a nice try assist to Suali'i, for example. Cut out balls to him, kicks through when, you know, they're pressing up on some of those guys on the outside. I'm creating a bit of a narrative for Tupou, but he's probably not someone that we look to get in our teams anyway, right?
Yeah, you're selling me. I mean, he does have a 2020 year where he averaged mid-40s, but I mean, there's a lot safer and a lot cheaper guys. But I mean, you can watch out for him if he how many tries did he get last year?
Not enough.
How many tries did he get last year? Probably wasn't as many as some of the others, eh?
Yeah. And look, a winger as well in that wing fullback position. If you had him in the centre position, there's some interest for sure. I know some of the Supercoach guys are thinking about him just because of the amount of tries that he could score. But obviously in fantasy, the tries aren't as beneficial scoring-wise as good run meters, tackle breaks, and offloads are. So just be aware of that. That he could average somewhere near 40 was probably not enough, right? With them having a bye in round 4. But it was a fun narrative.
He actually got 16 tries last year, which is more than I thought. And Suali'i got 15. So I mean, if that weapon of a combo is on the left side, maybe they do get more, but yeah, it's probably not enough. It's like Alex Johnston. You have to average 30 tries in a year to even get close to wing fullback status when you're on the wing, unless you're a massive offloader or tackle breaker.
Yeah, running for 200 meters a game and stuff. What do you do? Almost 30 tries and hit 42 average. Is that right? 41 and a half.
Yeah, something like that. Brian To'o can do that with half the tries with all of his tackle breaks and offloads and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely an interesting player as well, isn't he? Which we spoke about. We got Tupanua. We won't talk about him too much because he's got an injury. Going to be out the first couple of months, guys. So about 8 weeks there. So don't think about him. And really, we want him to come off the bench before he gets any chance of being in our sides. We've got Turpin, who will avoid if there is an injury to Brandon Smith, then he could be a play. But until then, don't talk about him. He could be a guy that could average in the 40s for you. So yeah, definitely an option if that happens. Warrior Hargraves, his role is diminishing. Obviously, great NRL player, the brute force in this team. But yeah, not an interest fantasy wise. We spoke about Sammy Walker, and then we got Connor Watson coming back in a later part of the year. Unfortunately, a pretty bad injury, it sounds like, from what Brian Sini was saying, NRL physio there. So again, one of those guys that we don't need to talk about until a bit later. He could come off the bench and play some limited minutes and get him at some point. I think that's enough talking from me. Scoop, what are your final thoughts on the Roosters?
Yeah, I think there could be a couple of interesting bench guys, a couple of interesting bench mids if injuries or head knocks do pop up, because there are a few guys who are prone to it. I see the new Roosters as number 1 this year. They might even go for the premiership too. Big ceiling for guys like Angus Crichton, Sam Walker, Tedesco, Brandon Smith. It's just that you can't load up on them to start because of that round 4 bye. If you've got 3 or 4, that means you're playing all of your emergencies. So pick 2 or 3 good ones maybe, but no more than that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to max out on 2, I reckon, with these guys here. Just see the last thing, I'll just scroll down. You've got Tedesco with his scores against bottom 8 and top 8 teams, which is a sneaky one there. But against the bottom 8, he's a 59 last year. Top 8 was a 49, so not a massive difference, obviously. And we're looking for him to have a bit of improvement this coming year. So yeah, anywhere there. You're probably not looking to captain him, right? But he's going to be a top scorer in that side. So thanks for all the analysis here, Scoop. We appreciate it. And we've got, 4 teams to go after this. Very exciting. See you guys.